right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this debate at Missisquoi Valley Union High School. We have 4 Senate candidates running for the Vermont State Senate from Franklin County. And what I'd like to do first of all, my name's Dante Napolitano. I'm a social studies teacher here at MVU. And this is a government class here to listen to our candidates. What I'd like our candidates to do is just give us a brief introduction of who you are, what town you live in Franklin County, and why you're running for state Senate. So if you would start, Mr. Bruck.
Sure. I'm Randy Bruck. I'm a current senator. I'm in my 3rd term in the Senate, and I'm running for my 4th term from Franklin County. And I live in Swanton. And my background is having served a number of terms in the Senate. I was formerly the Vermont State Auditor, and I'm also former executive of a large financial services company. I'm running for the Senate because it's the greatest place to do the most good for people in Vermont right now. It's a really enjoyable place to work most days. And it's interesting because you can do things at the highest level that affect Vermont overall. Issues like healthcare and taxation, and on the one hand, but at the same time, we do a lot of constituent service issues, such as people who have a problem with government, something that isn't working for them. We can also deal with helping that individual as an individual.
My name's Corey Parent. I live in St. Albans town. For the past 4 years, I've served as the state representative for St. Albans City and part of St. Albans town. When I'm not in the legislature, I run the Hickok and Boardman Insurance Office in St. Albans. And I'm running for the state Senate for many of the reasons why I ran for the state house 4 years ago. I'm only 10 years out of BFA. I grew up here in Franklin County, and when I returned from college, it was clear that my friends weren't always moving home. They had found opportunities elsewhere. Vermont was a pretty unaffordable place to live, still is. So I'm really running for the state Senate to amplify the voice I've had in the House, to try to make Vermont a little more affordable place so that you folks can stay here or come back after college and buy your first homes, so you can get good paying jobs and raise your families here. My wife and I just had our first child 4 months ago, and actually right after this debate we're going to his 4-month wellness check. So I want you guys to be able to return to Vermont and have a safe place. And the opiate epidemic really began when I was in high school with a prescription pill problem, and has always been one of the biggest issues to me, and something that I hope to continue to address in the state Senate, just so that we have safer and cleaner communities.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us here today. I'm Pam McCarthy, and I'm running for the Senate. I live in St. Albans town now, but I did live in Swanton before. My husband brought us here as the principal of MVU and was eventually superintendent, and I've had 2 kids go through school here. So I'm a parent of 4 and a grandparent of 5 now. My roles have been in early education and human services over the last 30 years or so. I'm currently the president and CEO of Vermont Family Network, which is a statewide organization that serves families of kids with disabilities and special health needs. Before that, I was Agency of Human Services Field Director here in Franklin and Grand Isle counties, and was also the Parent-Child Center Director at the Family Center of Northwestern Vermont. Also had a small business, Cosmic Bakery and Cafe, over in St. Albans with my sons for a few years. So I bring a broad and varied experience, and I'm really excited about the opportunity to run and to serve. I think my experience, just as a person living in this area, having had kids here and having been a small business owner and having worked in human services in early childhood, will really lend itself well to the duties of being a senator. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity, and thanks again for having us.
My name is Dustin Tanner. I am originally from Fairfield, right on the Fairfield-Enosburg Falls line. I'm 24 years old, so I'm 5 years out of high school, class of 2012. I decided to run for Senate because I think it's the best place where I can do the most good. I'm running on the platform of, we have 5,000 people in Franklin County living in poverty, and I want to help those people. Who more to talk about affordability than someone who myself has lived paycheck to paycheck growing up? So I take that experience, and that's part of why I'm running. I spent a lot of time at MVU during the winter. If some of you recognize my voice, I cover hockey and basketball games here. I am a sports guy, and that was my first job at Northwest Access TV, doing an internship that was paid for by the state for at-risk youth. And then I've turned that into a sports passion that has grown, and I've always loved the MVU community because it's always been really welcoming to me. Even up in the Highgate Arena, where it's sometimes the coldest place on earth, I love spending time up there, and I will be doing that again this winter. But I'm running for Senate because it's really important for me as a young person who has lived paycheck to paycheck to give other young people like myself a fighting chance when they come out of high school.
Thank you very much. So we're going to open the floor to questions now. And if students could stand up, introduce yourselves, tell us what town you're from, and you can ask any one or all of the candidates a question. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Serena Power, and I live in Franklin, Vermont. Mr. Perrin, you mentioned something about the drug epidemic in this area resulting from prescription
pills. So when I was in high school, we saw it was a lot of it was the extra. It was kind of when the market got flooded, I think, with a lot of OxyContin or oxycodone or various pills. So it's morphed into a more issue with heroin and other issues. But where I saw it take root in my friends when I was your age, one of my best friends who got caught up in it, I remember hurt his ankle pretty badly towards the end of football season of our senior year, and he goes, I just want to get through the next 2 weeks. I'm going to take these pills just to get through the next 2 weeks. And then it was basketball season, and then it was baseball season, and then by the time he was in college, he knew, he told me, he goes, Corey, I knew I hit rock bottom when I was at Disney World with my family, and I'm in the bathroom shooting up heroin. And he's gone on since to get clean and to get a master's, college degree, a master's degree in counseling, and so on and so forth. But that's where the problem started from my own experiences. When I saw it, when I was, like I said, when I was your age. But yeah, so a prescription pill problem is where we started from. Yep.
Serena, did you have a question around that, or?
I did. When you brought that up, I was pretty stoked because I had. Do you believe that the drug crisis in Franklin County is related to the overprescription of pharmaceutical drugs? So that was something I was interested in.
And I do agree with that, and I think that's why I supported cross-party lines and supported when Peter Shumlin was governor, an act that restricted the number of pills doctors are able to prescribe for certain issues. And what we've seen in the first couple years of enactment is a 25% decrease in the prescription of some of these pills. So I think that's a very important step that state government was able to do to help kind of limit the access to the market.
Great. Does anyone else want to chime in on prescription?
Sure, I'll just add, Vermont has a strategy, and that strategy involves prevention, treatment, recovery, and enforcement. And all four of those things have to be present in order to deal with the opioid epidemic. It's interesting that Vermont actually is the leader in the country right now at a state level in dealing with opioids. And it's hard to believe given the nature of our problem and the fact that there's so much more to be done. But even California now is emulating the strategy that we have here in Vermont. Now, in July of 2017, we added the St. Albans hub, because before, when we had people who were dealing with drugs and needing treatment, they had to go to Newport or Burlington. And even before that, I remember when I first went to the Office of State Auditor, I was appalled at the amount of money that we were spending sending a woman from Franklin County every single day to North Adams, Massachusetts, in order to receive methadone treatment. Now, we don't have any more waiting lines, and we have the ability to treat people here in Franklin County. That's a major step. There's a lot more we have to do in terms of enforcement, particularly with our federal partners, just to deal with things like fentanyl as well as heroin. But we've made a great deal of progress.
I would agree that we do have a big problem with this, and a lot of it did start with overprescription of pain medication. And a lot of that has to do with our pharmaceutical industry telling doctors that this really was okay. So a lot of people have ended up addicted to opioids, and we've made such progress in terms of identification and treatment. And to Randy's point, we've improved the access to treatment, but we still don't have what I consider to be developmentally and clinically appropriate treatment that's available at the time somebody's actually ready to go into recovery. So we're working on that. The hub and spoke model has helped a lot. And here in Swanton, Dr. Ed Hawk has opened a new Day, which is a really interesting model that looks at peer support by a doctor who's had this lived experience as well as the medical expertise to help people get back on their feet in recovery and get connected to work and community again. And that makes a huge difference in terms of really coming back to your life, if you will. So I think we're making progress, and I think we do have a lot more to do. I'm committed to making that work happen and to also seeing us make some changes in the criminal justice system in terms of how we deal with drug purveyors and how we deal with addicts, that is substance use disorder clients, and making sure that they have the mental health and the substance treatment supports that they need when and where they need them.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add here, because everyone else up here has said a lot of good things about this. I want to work when it comes to expanding treatment to identifying those in high school who might be coming from situations that are more prone to become addicted to something, right? Because I'm sure you guys have some classmates that come from not the best situations that you see go down the rabbit hole. And I'd also like to work to have job training programs for those coming out of recovery. One of the biggest drivers of reoffending in this case is, you get out of rehab and then you don't have anywhere to go, you have no way to make money, and then you go and, you use again. So I'd like to use those types of things to curb the problem, along with the suggestions made up here. The bill that Corey worked on is one of the better bills. That is one of the best things. And it speaks to how, we can all work together on something when we all have the best interest of people at heart.
Thank you. Another question from the class.
Hi, I'm Nick Luna and I'm from Swanton. Mr. Parent, you brought up something about housing costs in Vermont, and my question is about our state population. Over the last decade, we've had a stagnating amount of people, and I'd like to know, and the 2020 census prediction shows that we will have an actual decline. So I was wondering, what would you support in the Senate to combat this?
Absolutely. So we do have a population that's declining. When I was in middle school at St. Albans City School not long ago, again, I'm 28 years old, we had 105,000 students in Vermont. We're down to about 70,000 students in Vermont, or 80,000 students in Vermont. And when my son graduates from high school, the projections are, the one just born 4 months ago, are to be around 60,000. That's our workforce. We need more people to come in so they can have jobs and they can pay taxes, because right now the cost of roads is spread among 300,000 employees across the Vermont. If that shrinks, it's that cost spread among more people makes it less and less expensive. So there are a number of things we can do. One, I'll point to what we've already tried to do. My first year in the House of Representatives, we passed legislation that allows first-time homebuyers in Vermont to get a $5,000 basically rebate to help them make their first down payment or pay closing costs. It's an interest-free money to you from the state that allows you to help supplement the cost of buying your first home. Two, we passed what's called a workforce housing bond. We bonded last year with Governor Scott's initiative $35 million, which will leverage another $65 million in building homes, not at low income level, but not at the high end level, but in that range where folks who have a two income household can afford to buy. I mean, right now when you look across Franklin County, it's really hard to find a home under $200,000 for your first home, and that's really expensive for most people to afford. And then we need where we need to go, we need permit reform. 30% of the cost in new construction in the state of Vermont, it can directly be related to permitting costs and the costs of going through the regulations within state government. So we can look at what we really need and what we have. But ultimately, we need to do more to make Vermont more affordable. We need folks to move back here. We have jobs and we have places that are looking to hire folks and pay them really well money. Governor Scott was in St. Albans last night and he was talking about companies across Vermont. They're looking to hire 50 engineers right now. They just can't find 50 engineers. So they're a good paying, and that company paid those people on average $100,000 a year. Those are really good jobs that we have openings for in Vermont, but we just need to make sure we have you folks who go off to Clarkson or Union or RPI and come back with engineering degrees and want to come back to Vermont and afford to be here. Because you may take your engineering degree to North Carolina where you can buy a really nice house for less money and not have to deal with the costs of living sometimes in Vermont. So, it again gets back to even rental costs. This year, the non-residential property tax was raised, and people goes, "Oh, that's on the rich non-Vermonters who live in Vermont will know it's on businesses, it's on any apartment building, it's on any of that. That rent was raised, our rents will be raised because of those tax increases. So we need to do more to be more efficient within our state government, live within our means, and then promote policies that allow development and growth in Vermont to be done cheaper.
Would anyone else like to add to the
Well, we need to
affordability?
be smarter about what we do in terms of workforce development in particular. We have people who graduate from schools in Vermont who are not necessarily matched with the jobs that are available here in Vermont. We need to try to do a better job of encouraging young people like yourselves to look forward as to where your job, your future job would lie, and to try to match what you would like to do with a pathway to get you there so that you can have an income and that you can have the ability to stay in Vermont if that's what you want to do. Time and time again, I hear from large employers, for example, that, hey, we need kids to join our workforce who are strong in math, for example. In particular, I hear in math and sciences. But we find that the education that they come with when they come to our workforce is not what we need. We try to send them out. In some cases, IBM, which is now Global Foundries, reported that they tried desperately to get people to fill jobs that would pay $70,000 to $80,000 a year as a starting salary, but they had great difficulty finding kids who were graduating from high school in Vermont who had the requisite skills to be able to fill those jobs, even with additional training. That's something that we have to work on. We have to work on with the educational establishment in Vermont and employers in Vermont to get them much more aligned at what needs to be done. We also have a great population of people who are familiar with Vermont, people who vacation here, people who went to college here but from out of state, and we're not then being particularly effective at taking those people who have Vermont connections and who perhaps might be good potential citizens here and enticing them and giving them the incentives and encouraging them and even talking to them about coming here. And then lastly, we have investors. You remember the EB-5 situation, which people talked about, and these are where foreigners paid $500,000 to invest in a project in Vermont in order to get their green card to qualify to live here. Well, interestingly enough, we had several thousand people who did that, and the state didn't do a single thing to try to encourage any of those investors who are coming here as new citizens of the United States to actually live here in Vermont, the place that's investing their money. That's a no-brainer. That's something that we should be doing and should have been doing all along.
I would agree that we have great opportunities right now to get people attracted to come here, and also to make ways for young people to stay here should they choose to do that, or go away and come back and bring your new skills from having gone away. Vermont is an excellent place to live. When we look at our landscapes, our waterways, the recreational opportunities, the opportunities to be entrepreneurial here as a small business person are extraordinary. I think too that the larger types of companies that Randy's referencing that have well-paying jobs, they're saying that there's a gap of about 10,000 jobs for the state right now when you look at the retirements we're anticipating and the jobs that will be opening up. Many of them are paying more than a livable wage, to Randy's point. And I think those are the things that we need to kind of promote. I was at a leadership forum here in Swanton the other day where they were talking about the formidable four, which are childcare, substance abuse, housing, and transportation, and saying if we can work together to address those issues, we will keep young people here, we will take care of our elders, and we'll also make sure that we're bringing new people in to build our tax base, to grow our state, and to make sure that we're capitalizing on the many, many strengths that we have here. This is a place that we want you all to be proud of living in. We feel like we could set the tone for the rest of the state and the rest of the country here in Franklin County.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I think Franklin County and I think Vermont are beautiful places to live. I want to work to attract some more people to the state because once you graduate high school, I know some of you will probably want to stay in Vermont, but there's always that urge to leave, and it's getting people to come back, right? I think getting people to just stay is kind of a losing battle sometimes, but attracting people back to Vermont after they've completed high school and not high school, college, and so on and so forth. Because we got a beautiful state. We have some wonderful mountains. We have the Long Trail. We have Lake Champlain, which we need to work to clean up. We have a city like Montreal that is less than an hour and a half away. So Vermont has a lot to offer as far as, why you'd want to live here when it comes to housing costs. Helping those young couples getting their first home is a big thing in this state. Also working to refund our education system where it's not solely reliant on just the property taxes, because if you can pay a lower property tax, you are more, you want to buy a house in Vermont. And just continuing to work to improve our infrastructure, our sidewalks, our roads, and making our downtowns beautiful. You have a place in Swanton right here where they're putting some money into it, or trying to put some money into it. And every year it gets a little nicer. And the same thing with St. Albans, the brand new sidewalks are now attracting businesses, and using government funding with the TIF project has made St. Albans a beautiful place to live that is starting to rival a place like Burlington. So investing in our communities, and also helping young people. Cold Hollow Career Center is a place I went in high school. It's the Enosburg Tech Center. And it gave me a lot of skills that prepared me to go directly into the workforce, because I wasn't going to college. I was not a go to high school, go to college type of kid. I took a different route. So making sure our tech centers are teaching for those jobs, like Randy has said, like those engineering jobs. So when you leave high school, you are equipped with the skills to go into the workforce and make a living for yourself.
Thank you. So we asked a question about the lake. Thank you.
So hi, my name is Zoe Broski. I'm from Highgate, and so there is no question that there is a problem with the quality of Lake Champlain, and every August the green algae takes over the lake, which is an extreme health risk. And what would you do to solve this problem?
Maybe start with someone new. Pam, do you want to start with this one?
Yes, water quality is near and dear to my heart. I live on the Maquam shore, and fortunately we have enough water movement there that we haven't experienced the cyanobacteria problem. However, St. Albans Bay, Lake Carmi, those areas are really, really terribly impacted. And so I would want to see us be able to figure out ways to pay for a sustainable way to not only clean up those issues, but to keep them clean. I was at a meeting around Lake Carmi the other night where they're talking about implementing aeration systems that will keep the water moving at the time when it is most at risk of having cyanobacterial blooms, and figuring out a way to pay for that. The state's been working in tandem with the community to make that happen, and I think, again, they're looking at how do we work with the pollution sources, including what comes from the farms, what comes from municipal waterways and waste, and being able to process that effectively so that we're not so much at risk. I think we have a role to play in terms of incentivizing that as a state, and figuring out how to move this forward in ways, again, that are sustainable so that we can preserve our waterways, not only for the beauty and the recreational aspects of it, but also from a public health standpoint, because it really is an issue for us when our water is at risk in this way. Thanks.
I'll jump in here. So yeah, cleaning the lake is big for me. One of my favorite places to swim is the Alberg Dunes. I'm sure some of you have gone up there during the summer, which is also in our Senate district. We represent that town. So the first thing I'd want to do is identify where that water comes from, right? Because the lake, it just doesn't get there overnight. It comes from watersheds, and going to farmers and saying, hey, let's work together. We got to stop villainizing farmers, because I came from a farming family, and to tell farmers, without farms you don't have food or milk. So telling farmers that they are the bad guy when it comes to this lake stuff is not helping out. So going up to farmers and saying, hey, we can help you put in best practices so less phosphorus is going into the watershed. And then in turn, it goes back to the infrastructure, right? Lake Carmi, investing in ditches, investing in septic tanks up there to make that lake clean along with aeration. And in turn, working on the Lake Champlain watershed. The Missisquoi River goes in every year. I'm sure everybody goes past the Missisquoi River and just sees how brown it gets and it smells during the summer, and working to clean that up so when it gets in the Lake Champlain, it starts to mitigate, it starts to get cleaner, right? This is not going to be something we see in 5 years. This is going to be a 10 to 25, sometimes even 50-year process. As far as paying for it goes, nobody in Montpelier has a solution yet. One of the things that I would like to look to is taxing cannabis. I'm a huge supporter of a regulated cannabis market and maybe diverting some funds from a tax and regulated market into cleaning our lake while we try to figure out a sustainable funding source, because it's all about return on investment right now. If we have a lake that we can market and that we can have tourism at, we will make the money we invest back. If we have a lake that taxpayers want to live on, we will make that money back. But if we don't do anything to clean the lake, we're not going to get any investment on that. So that's what I would do, to put together the pieces of helping to clean Lake Champlain and Lake Carmine.
Corey or Randy?
Well, the estimates right now that we see about cleaning up the lakes are something like $60 million a year for the next 20 years. That's a lot of money. But when you start thinking about $60 million a year is 1% of the state's budget, because our state budget is almost $600 million a year. So it's within the realm of possibility that we can devote the resources, and indeed, it could be that we can find some of the resources already within state government. For the next 2 to 3 years, Treasurer has advised that we do, in fact, have the money available, which we are devoting to efforts to clean up the lake. This algae problem is not unique to Vermont. And we've seen perhaps news reports that you've read over the past year or so that Lake Okeechobee in Florida now has green algae. And now, most recently, Lake Superior in the Midwest is also facing a green algae problem. And in a way, that's bad, but in a way, for us, that's good. It's good because it will be much more likely that we will have the federal authorities also view this as a serious problem worthy of federal money, and they have the pockets, the deep pockets that we don't have. And the more senators and representatives from other states who join with our congressional delegation to lobby for increased funding. We used to depend a lot on federal funding for our lake cleanup efforts in past years, but some of that money has been cut back, and we have not been receiving the amount of money that we really need to make this happen. I'm hoping that that will change, particularly as the green algae problem moves forward.
So again, this is a critical issue, and this one came up. This might have been one of the biggest issues in the 2014 election when I first ran for the House, and we went on to pass H35, which is the newest version of a clean water bill. And in my legislative career, if not one of the only taxes I've ever voted to increase. I have a record of voting against $316 million in tax increases. I worked very hard to find the money within state government not to have to raise that tax, but at the end of the day, knowing that we had to clean up our waterways, I voted for the bill. So we had investment there, but we also have other ways to clean up the lake and other ways to fund it. One, working very close with the administration, Hydro-Quebec's looking to build a power line to get energy down to the New York City area, and it's called the TDI power line. If that goes in, they will invest $400 million in water quality. That's almost a quarter of the price, or $400 million to the state of Vermont, which we could then use for water quality, which is a quarter of the money we would need to clean up the lake over the next 20 years. We also need to hold municipalities accountable. Look at Burlington. Every day you turn on the news, it's Burlington or Rutland dumping sewage into our lakes. And Lake Champlain's one of those lakes that flows north, which is an oddity in science. And so that water's coming up here to St. Albans Bay and Maquam Bay and coming up to this part of Vermont. So a lot of the stuff we're handling is coming from Chittenden County and other parts of the state. But we also need to recognize the good work that our farmers have done over the last 4 years. The bill we passed did invest a lot of money in best practices, planting winter rye and changing, injection, manure spreading. I mean, we still see broadcasts, but a lot more farmers across Vermont are injecting their manure, and that's all helping. And some, and a lot of people point to them in that industry, but they're the ones who've probably made the most leaps and bounds in water quality, and we need to continue to work with them on their end, especially in a tough economic time for them. Milk prices are low. It's really tough to be a farmer now, and so we need to supplement them in that place. But, I think between, like Randy said, being more efficient within state government, finding 1% of money, that's a penny on every dollar we spend to invest in water quality, and holding municipalities like Burlington accountable for the pollution they're dumping into our lakes.
Great. Next question.
Hi, Avery Feely, I'm from Franklin. So what do you guys think about the new gun control bill? What would you do to either help it out or change it completely for anybody?
The gun control bill, did you say?
Yeah, like the lowering that or increasing the age.
Happy to start.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Randy.
We had 3 bills in the last session that dealt in some way, shape, or form with gun violence. The first 2 bills were really not gun control bills. They were violence control bills. They were bills that allowed for orders both on the civil side to protect victims of domestic violence and on the criminal side to protect against people who were being arrested for cases of sexual violence or domestic violence. In both of those cases, those people would be required to turn over firearms under the supervision of a court. And one of the arguments that many opponents of bills like that in the past had was that there was no judicial review and that there were both First and Fourth Amendment issues, particularly Fourth Amendment issues, violations of search and seizure, that are involved in taking firearms away without judicial process. Those 2 bills both address that issue. And interestingly enough, you saw all the controversy in the press, but on those 2 issues, you had both the gun control advocates on the one hand, and you had the Second Amendment supporters like the NRA on the other, all came together and agreed, and bills like that passed nearly unanimously because all sides agreed that that's what they did, is they protected people against violence. We had a third bill, which was called S-55. That bill contained a number of provisions such as limiting the size of firearms magazines, lowering the age of purchase, providing registration for non-gun shop gun sales among friends and neighbors, and also limiting bump stocks, those 4 provisions. That bill was much more controversial. I voted for the first 2 bills. I voted against that bill. Again, very controversial. I voted against S-55 because I believe that what it will do is it will punish thousands of law-abiding Vermonters without necessarily providing any protection against gun violence. And if you look back to 35 years of history of violent incidents, mass shootings in America, not one of those would have been prevented by any of the measures contained in S-55. But at the same time, it affected things like the recreational shooting industry, in which we have competitions in Vermont. The gun magazine bill limits that. It's largely unenforceable because there's nothing on a gun magazine that tells you when it was made. And so you don't know whether it was made before October 1 or after October 1. And so that largely becomes unenforceable. And you had just a number of other issues, I think, that were of major concern by civil libertarians. As a result, I did not think that that was a good bill. What I think we should have done, and I think what I will be working on if I'm returned to the Senate this year, is much more work on things like hardening schools, ensuring that we have school resource officers available, ensuring that we have appropriate training on how to deal with incidents of violence, and above all, doing what we need to do more, and that is improve our mental health system. Because by and large, these mass shootings have been a product of mental health and mental health systems that have not been adequate to deal with the threat.
Yeah, I agree with everything Randy just said on those pieces. I voted, again, Randy and I are the only 2 here who are on the record on this issue and with our actual votes. And I voted for the first 2 bills, like Randy said, and I voted against S-55. I voted against S-55 for many of the same reasons Randy talked about. One, this was brought upon us by an incident in Fairhaven, and not one thing passed in S-55 would have stopped him from being able to do that. One, in the universal background checks, a criminal background check, week 1, because of HIPAA and federal regulation, we can't put any mental health issues in there. We can't prevent someone who may be seeing a doctor, may have told their doctor they're suicidal or that they'd commit these crimes, and we can't. That's not in the background check system. The federal government doesn't allow us to for patient confidentiality. So we don't stop anyone from buying there. Or we see a case what happened here in Vermont this summer. People who hadn't never broke the law were buying guns and trading those guns for drugs to people who had broken the law and doing that. So laws only prevent law-abiding people from doing something. They don't stop criminals from doing anything. And as Randy said, a lot of the materials that folks would be looking to use are going to be plentiful anyway in the market, and you can bring them in from anywhere. The bill also had some flaws in it that we were able to fix. If the bill had originally passed as it originally did the House, it would have cost 106 jobs here in Franklin County at Century Arms. I was able to work with Lynn Dickinson to get language in there to protect those jobs. And unfortunately, you think something like that would pass unanimously through the building, but there were still 25 folks in Vermont who'd rather see jobs go away from Vermont, or 25 folks in the House anyway that would rather see jobs leave Vermont than stay in Vermont. And so, it's a tough issue, but like Randy said, the path forward is working on school safety. It's working on our mental health problem. It's not limiting your rights as law-abiding Vermonters to be able to buy something to go shoot for sport or to go hunting with.
So, as I said in my opening, I'm a parent and a grandparent. And I have a 6-year-old granddaughter who was fearful about going to school. And they do safety drills and they have all of those things going on now. My platform has also been about really listening to people. And I think it's important to note that the legislature and the governor, in their response to what was happened and threatened at Fairhaven and also what had happened in Florida just prior to that, caused them to really step up to the plate and listen primarily to young people and parents who were saying public safety is an issue here. We're worried about our schools. We're worried about our community spaces. Do something. So they acted, and to Randy and Corey's remarks, they did take action, and I think that, again, it was courageous. I think the jury's still out on how well this will impact public safety and responsible gun ownership, because by and large, people who have guns are responsible gun owners. I agree. I don't know that what was passed necessarily negatively impacts people. I'm not a gun owner, and I will admit that. But I'm here now in this position, campaigning and hopefully serving, open to listening to both people who are concerned about their rights being threatened by what we passed in the last session, and those who are concerned still that maybe we haven't done enough. I think we need to give the new laws time to take root and see what happens, and really be careful to continue to listen and respond to all perspectives around this before we do anything else. Thanks.
So I work in a school, right? So school safety is something that means a lot to me. For those who don't know, I am the IT tech at Milton High School. So I work with high schoolers every day, 40 hours a week. So I'm in school 5 days a week. So I look at S55, and if I was down in the Senate, I probably would not have voted for it. And this is where I break with some of my Democratic colleagues. Because a bill just to pass a bill is not worth it. And I think there are some things in S55 that, the bump stock stuff, I don't think you can enforce that. And if you can't enforce that, what's the point of making a law that you can't enforce, right? And that just kind of seems redundant. I do like the idea of having to take a hunter safety course before you buy a gun. You have to learn how to drive a car before you can just go out and get on the road, right? And I think that's something that we could work with hunters on. And, it's just good to have hunter safety courses. As far as the other bills I don't look at those bills as like taking away the guns. I look at them as prevention, violence prevention, right? I grew up in a house when I was 5 years old. My father beat my mother almost to death in front of me. And if my father was collecting guns or was into guns, I would not be here today. And domestic violence is a really hard thing to work with. So having a structure where if somebody is taken out at 3 a.m. by a state trooper because of domestic violence, we take the guns away until we can go through some due process for the safety of the people in that home, for the safety of the children in the home. And I think that's really important. And when it comes to the other one of taking the guns against when it comes to people who are a harm to themselves, my mother's best friend was an Army sniper in Iraq. He served 6 to 8 years. One day he shot himself in his front yard. He was somebody who obviously dealt with PTSD. He was somebody who had no ability to get the help he needed. And a bill like this would have helped him out and would make it so he's still here today. So when it comes to violence prevention, I'm all for it. I come from a family of hunters, even though I don't hunt myself. My first couple of years, I went down to deer camp in southern Vermont, loved it. And I'm not going to do anything that hurts hunters. I want to do things that help prevent violence. When it comes to hardening the schools, I don't think hardening the schools is where to go. I think softening and helping students who have to deal with things on a day-to-day basis. Students will fall through the cracks because they don't have that teacher to talk to sometimes. So I think going and making sure our students who are in schools have all the resources that they need to be successful students is what we should do. I do like resource officers in the school because I had one in Enosburg who I still talk to sometimes, and we have one at Milton that's really friendly. But that's pretty much what I would do.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hello, my name is Zachariah Campbell. I live in Swanton and St. Albans. The question I would like to ask is, in the 2016 Republican presidential primaries, a few of the candidates said they would not mind a border wall along the Canadian border. I would like to know your opinions, and should we need a border wall?
I'll take that one. The answer is no. I don't think we need one with Canada. I don't particularly think we need one with Mexico either, but that's more national politics. But going back to those things you talk about, what you guys will go to college for and what you'll do, I was an economics and government major at St. Lawrence University in upstate New York. What most people don't know is I was a Canadian studies minor. So I've done a lot of work. In my first year in the legislature, I was selected by the Canadian government as one of 6 rising leaders from across the United States to go to a week-long tour in Toronto, Montreal, and then we ended up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, building relationships with folks across the border. And our largest trade partner here in Vermont is Quebec. We have a lot of economic activity with them, and I think we need to do what we can to protect that relationship. 100 years ago, the last name like Parent, or as they would say just north of the border, Parent, we came back and forth, families there, between the Shire towns in Quebec and northern Vermont and northern New York. I think we ought to be embracing our relationship with Canada, embracing our relationship with Quebec, and doing what we can to increase trade with them. And I don't think a wall gets us there. I think our Border Patrol do a great job. They work with our Franklin County Sheriff's Department and do a great job in trying to prevent any illegal activity at the border. But to me, I'm more about figuring out how we can grow our economy and get more economic trade between the two regions to benefit both us and them.
I'll go next. I love Canada. I don't know why we would ever think about putting a wall up there. Also don't agree with a wall on the Mexican border. I'm fully against that. But going back to what Corey said, Canada is one of our biggest partners in Vermont because we don't really do as much trade with, like, southern states probably don't do a lot of trade with Canada, but we really rely heavily on the Canadians. And I love working with them. I've never met a Canadian that I don't like. And I go up to Montreal, 3 or 4 times a year myself. And I think anything we can do to have good relations with Canada is positive for Vermont and positive for New England in general, right? Maybe encourage our friends in New Hampshire and New York to, even though things nationally might get a little frantic sometimes, still have great relationship with Canada because they only help us out. They're wonderful people up there.
So my answer too, and I never thought I'd agree with Corey on this, but is no. I do not think we need a wall between us and Canada for many of the reasons that were already cited, and I would agree too that a wall with Mexico and along the southern border is not what is indicated in terms of us moving forward as a country. I think we kind of need to change the tone and figure out ways to encourage diversity and encourage new business and new relationships. So that's all very important to me. And Canada, first and foremost, is our trading partner here in Vermont. We have a lot of work to do together, and I think a wall would certainly hamper that. Thank you.
I think the issue of a wall on the northern border was something that would likely cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And this is not a good investment of public dollars, in my opinion. We already have a wall. It's called a virtual wall. And if you look at the number of electronic sensors and cameras and other tools that the Border Patrol already has at its disposal, and seems to be doing a pretty good job with those tools, I think that's enough.
My name's Shaker Peters. I live in Swanton, Vermont. My question is, what is your guys' opinions on the marijuana recreational use law, and how do you think it will affect Vermont as a whole in the upcoming years?
You want to start?
You want me to start on this? Yeah, I will. I think I'm the most pro-cannabis candidate on this forum, as I mentioned earlier. I don't like the law because I want a taxed market. I want a full cannabis market. And it kind of felt like this law was a slap in the face of advocates who had been working really, really hard to get some common sense legislation out there, because prohibition does not work. And every year we don't have a regulated market. You look at our craft brew industry, you look at how businesses like that have popped up all around the state. You could do that with cannabis as well. I am in the camp where cannabis is less harmful than alcohol. That's my personal belief. So I would I'm glad they passed something as far as some type of making it legal goes. But I want to push for a full regulated market where, once you're 21, you can make the decision to buy and do it in your own home if you want. And I don't think roadside testing, there's always the saliva testing bit that has been proven to be junk science. And to hold up an economy where we could be bringing in millions of dollars based off something that has been proven as junk science doesn't seem like good state government to me. I think we should fully embrace it. I think we should have it regulated like we do with alcohol in some cases. And I know federally, the argument is that, the feds still classify marijuana as this category drug, but they aren't going after the other states. And I think it makes sense for us to do it because, we do have states' rights, right? If they come after us, we can lawyer up and we can fight them as long as we can. And I think soon, I hope one day we have a federal administration that understands that, cannabis is not as harmful as something like heroin. And the one follow-up I would have to that is that, I work in a school, right? So I know students who get access to these things. And if you get access to alcohol from your cousin, it's coming from a store, it's regulated, the source of where it's coming from. If you get access to cannabis, you don't know where that's coming from. So by moving the market completely above ground, we will know that if and when our youth do get cannabis, it's coming from a safe place, and then we can use money to educate our youth on why you shouldn't be doing this until you're 21. Use it to put into programs to help teenagers develop good coping mechanisms instead of turning to drugs and alcohol.
Go down the line.
Okay, we'll go down the line then. So in that we have already made this decision to go with recreational marijuana, i.e. cannabis, I do think it would be important to tax and regulate it. I think we need to clarify adult use and we need to clarify medical marijuana. I think there is an opportunity for revenue from this, much of which could be used for education and for building the industry that's connected to it. We're also seeing in the whole cannabis area, there's work that's moving forward with hemp and with CBD and some growing industries around that. I think that by taxing and regulating this, we can make sure that the product is of quality for people who are choosing to use it, and that we are actually gaining some revenue from having it used.
So I oppose the current marijuana bill as it was written. For a number of reasons. I think one, we didn't do anything to. So actually, I'll highlight it best in my opposition and someone I know who's a single dad, and he splits custody with his kids. He goes, I don't want to grow marijuana plants in my house, but the weekend I don't have my kids. If I want to sit down and smoke a joint, I want to be able to do that. This law did nothing to allow me to do that. I still have to go to a dealer. I still would have to go and do X, Y, and Z. So I still personally struggle with the legalization of marijuana, but I'm also a realist and understand it's here, and probably nationally it's going to be here to stay moving forward. And it'll continue to grow, but I think we did it in a really poor way here in the state of Vermont with the law that passed. I think we should have taken a little more time. I think developed that regulated market and ultimately lead to a regulated marketplace. I don't love that I've had to come to that position personally. I think you'll learn sometimes in politics or anything in life when you've got to compromise. You've got to know. Don Turner actually was the minority leader who's running for lieutenant governor, and he spoke, I think, best on the House floor when this happened. He goes, I'm willing to admit I lost, but in losing, I now have the obligation to make this policy the best policy it can be going forward for the state of Vermont, if this is so the direction that we've chosen to go. And then I fall into that camp. I think I would, as your next senator, look to see how we potentially could do it better and not, have folks running around. It's really largely unenforceable. You have 2 adult plants, 4 mature plants, but the last I checked, 4 mature plants grow into 4 adult plants. What do you do with those other 2 plants? It becomes really confusing, and I just don't see the logistics of how it works. So I would probably reluctantly be someone who would more likely look to move towards the tax and regulate system if it were to come up, because I think that's a better way to go if you're going to have legal marijuana, which the state of Vermont has chosen to go.
I take a somewhat different view to some of my colleagues for a number of reasons. First, it's illegal under federal law, and we live in a nation of laws, and we ask people to obey the law. To create an industry that can be obliterated by the stroke of a federal bureaucrat's pen as a U.S. attorney decides to prosecute people involved in the marijuana industry in Vermont, which they can do right now under federal law. I certainly wouldn't want to invest in a business that has that risk hanging over it. When we talked about legalization, we heard a lot of testimony. We heard it from our educators, we heard it from the medical community, and we heard it from the law enforcement community, and was almost unanimously in opposition. In particular, the medical community's comments struck me about the effect of marijuana on the young brain up to the age particularly of 25. Of course, they say the same thing about alcohol, and if we were to follow that rule, we probably wouldn't legalize alcohol for people under 50. And so I understand that there's another point of view, but more than anything else, what I hear today is we're going to make a lot of money on this. And that's where I go back to my area of expertise. I sit on the Senate Finance Committee. We deal with taxes and taxation. I've looked very carefully at how much money we're going to make, and all this stuff that we're going to make millions of dollars, I think is absolute nonsense. If you look at the pricing, when we did a plan a few years ago about a tax and regulate market, we based it on being able to charge a particular tax rate. We then calculated how much money we would have to spend on education, on prevention, and also on the medical issues associated with wider use of marijuana. When we look at that today, and we look at the fact that the tax rates being charged in jurisdictions adjacent to us, such as Massachusetts, is so much materially lower than the tax rate we estimated. The bottom line, and I know we've had independent reviews through the Joint Fiscal Office that say the same thing, is for the money that we get through tax and regulate, we're going to spend all of that money on administering the marijuana laws and on dealing with the fallout associated with it. There isn't going to be any big windfall of money, and we're not going to have a major gain. Now we go and we take a look at what's happening in other states where there is a tax and regulate market. And the data is coming in somewhat slowly, but we see some of the issues in Colorado, for example, in which hospitalization rates, the cost of intervention, law enforcement in terms of the black market still coming in because the black market is still cheaper than the tax and regulate market, and a number of other issues. It gives me cause to say, well, maybe we ought to slow down and take a look at all the implications of this, what it's actually going to cost us, and what the effect is going to be on our population before we move forward.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Janessa Ryan from Swanton. My question is, although media influence in politics is just growing as time goes on, do you think that the said influence is actually negatively impacting those who do choose to run for political office?
Did everyone hear the question?
Is it media or social media?
Could you repeat that?
Just media in general.
Oh, I'm happy to start. In terms of media, I don't think media, certainly in a state Senate race, has a very great effect on us one way or the other. Most of the media don't really comment or make endorsements, and if they do, half the population doesn't pay any attention to them anyway. So I don't think media has a great effect on what we do. Where media does have an impact, though, is, for example, the County Courier and the St. Albans Messenger this year gave a question a week, homework, for each of us as candidates, in which we had to write our positions down, and those were presented in the paper. So week after week after week, those people who are interested in where we stood in a little more detail on a lot of major issues affecting people got a chance to read that. That was our unvarnished statement, not necessarily influenced by media opinion, and I think that is probably going to be much more useful to voters as they evaluate whether or not they want to vote for us.
I agree with Randy that traditional media, I think, has been fine. I think, coverage of the issues or what might comes up, asking us questions on something we may have said or done, or our opinion on issues is fine, or channel, public access TV is a form of media, and I think that's fine. We're here today. I do find, and I do worry, I'm of the generation that grew up with social media and have seen it, and I do worry that I think social media has allowed folks to be much more polarized in their political beliefs. I think it's allowed folks to go to their extremes and be in echo chambers where they agree with each other. Much of what we do at the local level here, though, is knocking on doors. My campaign's been out to about 13,000 doors this summer and fall, and when you talk to people one-on-one or you have the conversations like we are in this room, we tend to have more civil discussion, and I think that's what our democracy is about. When someone can hide behind a Twitter handle or something or whatever it is, I find it's easier to drive our politics down. It's not easy for any of us to do this. No one on this stage, we all put our personal lives on hold to run for office. There are times, we're out at events or in other debates, and I'd probably rather be tucking my son in and reading him a story or so on and so forth. So we do this because we love our community, and I think the national politics, as it continues to grow, and especially the last couple of weeks, I think, I'm lucky this is not my first time running for office, but most folks running for office, the last couple of weeks can be really stressful on them because they put so much work and so much energy of the last year into this. They don't want to make mistakes, and I find a lot of times that's when candidates make those mistakes because of those pressures, and I just think people are on edge. So I think if we can do whatever we can do to kind of remember we're all human, we're all just trying to do what we think is best for our community, I think social media is the bigger problem to this than traditional media. I think traditional media is fine and is an important part of our democratic process.
I would agree that traditional media is giving us a real voice in terms of stating our case to people in a oftentimes really contracted way. The messenger requires us to say it in 150 words, so it's almost like Twitter, and that works out well for us. And then we have a little more space to be able to express our opinions in the Courier. Again, not everybody reads traditional media anymore, so it's really important that we have things like public access television and social media and other areas where people can connect and ask questions. I would agree with Corey that the anonymity that one can have in social media can be really dangerous and difficult at times. I think when you see the tone that's been set at the national level, it's emboldened some people to be able to be almost vicious sometimes in what it is they put forward, which isn't helpful to this process in the long run. We want to engage in a civil way to be able to state opinions and engage with each other and with you all as potential voters in what's really most important to us. It's an opportunity to really listen and learn and, as I said, engage with one another. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And also to Corey's point, for those of us that are newer to this and are learning how to use media, it's been a real education. It's remarkable to have younger people connected to the campaigns too, to kind of help direct us where we may not have even thought to go at times, to be able to reach the broadest audience. I'm really interested in hearing from people, and whether it's in a conversation at a door or at an event or at a forum like this, that's where we really get the best connection. So I would encourage you to continue to try to connect with us in any way, shape, or form you see possible. We all have websites and Facebook pages and all of that stuff, and it's really important to hear from you and your perspective because we want to serve ultimately. Thanks.
Yeah, so, Corey mentioned something really good about Twitter handles. I'll admit that I've been divisive on Twitter. I will own it because one of the things that happens as you grow up is digital citizenship. We need to do better at learning about digital citizenship and teaching kids what is right, what is wrong, what should you post, what shouldn't you post, and I've learned some of that the hard way. That being said, when it comes to your question about media, I love our local media. Like I said, my first ever job was at our public access station. I spent 4 or 5 months there through, I think it was the 2012 election cycle. I don't remember how long ago it was. But, The media, the public access station does some amazing work. The Courier and the Messenger, I love the questionnaire that we've gotten from both of those papers because it gives candidates a chance to get out there. When it comes to other forms of newer media, divisiveness is something that, we do have to work on the echo chamber a little bit. And I've had to step out of my echo chamber and learn from a lot of people, And I've actually shaped some of my views learning outside of the echo chamber. And I think that's a good thing to do. I have been able to leverage a platform like Facebook because I don't have the thousands of dollars as other people campaign does. So I've been able to, leverage Facebook to help bridge some of that gap for some of those doors that I can't hit. So, I think the media can have a positive effect on all elections. I trust our journalists. Even when a story gets written about you that you don't like, journalists are here to do a job, and that's what they do. They write about you when you don't want them writing about you in some cases. That's the job of a journalist. So, I think the media does a wonderful job, but I think it all goes back to digital citizenship. You can post a bunch of nasty things on Instagram, Visco, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, but you got to teach people young how to use these apps. I was part of that generation where we had got, growing up with Facebook, Twitter, and then Snapchat came out when I was in high school, and you don't get education on how to use those things properly. And one of the things I see in my day-to-day life working IT is talking to students and being like, well, maybe you shouldn't post that on Facebook, and I can go back to my own experiences on that. So, yeah, I like the media in general.
Great. Well, we want to thank you all for coming to MVU today and sharing your insights and time with us. We wish you the best of luck in the race, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.